Hi, my name is Tara Marmolejos, and I'm going to talk about The Ugly American. Um, First of all, The Ugly American is a book that it talks about a fictional country called Sarkhan during the Cold War in the 1950s in Southeast Asia. Through a series of stories, the author explains everything that is wrong with the American policy. The book starts with the ambassador Loki Lu Sears. He is the ambassador of the United States when the book starts, and he has absolutely no knowledge about the culture, the history, or even the language of Sarkhan. And because of this, he makes a lot of mistakes, and he's considered by the Sarkhan population as a laughingstock. On the other hand, in the book describes the Soviet ambassador, who, unlike the ambassador Sears, he happens to have knowledge about the culture, the history of Sarkhan prior to um, being assigned as an ambassador. He also speaks the language, which means that he doesn't need a translator. Unfortunately, for United States, the only problem that's not their only problem. His ambassador, the rest of the American embassy staff lacks of any knowledge about anything about the country that they are, and they all have a Sarkhan people working as drivers, maids, translators, which gives a little bit of helps a little bit of the no of with the notion of this white Western person that comes to Asia just to be served, and that doesn't necessarily look at the Asian people as their equal. Furthermore, the fact that the Americans employ Sarkans as translators helps the Soviets and the communists in general to be able to infiltrate spies. That's the example of one of the characters in the book, Ambassador McWhite, who had two Sarkan people working as in his house, and he was convinced that they couldn't speak English nor they could read and write. And thanks to a Chinese colleague, it turns out that they were in fact able to speak English and to write and read, and even worse, they were working as spies for the communists. One of the characters that represents very vividly the problem with the Americans in foreign countries, especially Asia, is an Asian journalist that goes to the United States to give an interview, and she explains that the Americans that are assigned in Asia, not only they have absolutely no knowledge or interest in anything about Asia, culture, history wise, language. They also they isolate themselves from the rest of the population, and they live this idyllic lives that nobody in those countries can afford. And the few interactions that they might have with locals comes from people that are part of elite class that are the minorities, and that their point of view and their interests are very distant from what is the reality of the rest of the population, and therefore their knowledge about the country where they are living, it's very limited and in many cases distorted. On the other side of the coin, the book also presents a lot of characters that give um, the good the good face of what the Americans in foreign countries should conduct themselves. There's the example, for example, of Tom Knox, which is a poultry guy that he moves to a small village in Sarkhan to help the people, the villagers, to produce more eggs, so their chickens can lay more eggs. Unfortunately, he gets discouraged after trying to expand his poultry project. There's example also for Father Finian, which is a Catholic priest in Burma who is successfully um, works a newspaper, an anti-communism newspaper, with a couple of locals, and helps to stop the expansion of the communism in that country. Also, there's the case of Homer and Emma Atkins, a couple who moves to a small village in Sarkhan, and the husband, Homer, he is an engineer, and he builds this machine to pump water in a region where it's very difficult to get water. And he does this with the help of the locals. His wife, she helps to improve the broom that the elders use, and therefore she improves the health and the well-being of the elderly segment. Also, there's the case of the ambassador McWhite, who, unlike the first ambassador in the book, he does learn the Sarkhan language, and he studied the history and the culture of the language of the country before moving to Sarkhan. And he actually, in the book, at the very end of the book, he explains what are, for him, in his opinion, the qualities that the people that work in positions in foreign countries should have. And one of the things that he says, the first and most important, is speak the language, understand the culture, understand the history of that country. They need to be well educated, not only in Western literature, but also in communism literature, that it was important in that day, especially in Asia, where they were fighting against the communism. And he also encouraged that the Americans needs to, where they live a modest life wherever they are, and live similar to how the average citizen in that country live. If I have to summarize 5 of the most important issues that are relevant in the book, that can be used in the PR profession and the advertising profession, I think that the first and important aspect of the book is the credibility. This is a very important aspect of the work of the PR practitioner. In Combs and Holiday book, it says that if your stakeholders, they don't believe that your intentions are genuine, they will not interact with your organization. If we see in the book, there are a lot of characters that they gain the trust of the people in the regions where they were. One of the examples is Father Finian. He actually started, before he started in his newspaper project, he started learning the language, and he started learning how to eat the same food that the people in the village eat it. Once he decided to do the newspaper, he gathered a few locals, and he actually gave them a voice. He didn't act as one, as the leader of the group, and he gained the credibility first. The same case with Homer Atkins. When he got to the village where he started working, he really had to do some work to gain their confidence, because usually Asians, especially in small villages, they are used to see a white man not as an equal, but as a person that wants to take advantage of them. The second one is to learn the culture, history, and country of the country that you are operating. This is a very, very important aspect, especially if you are working for a company that works in very different markets. For example, if you work for McDonald's, you need to know about regulations in other countries, and in order to not, make mistakes. In the second week, we learn about the ethical standards and legal regulations of the PR practitioners and the advertising industry. And this knowledge will help you to not make mistakes. In the book, we see, for example, the Soviet ambassador who actually study to in order to go to Sarkhan and be the ambassador, because in order for you to not make mistakes, you need to be aware of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. The third point is the empathy. In order to gain credibility and gain trust, you need to be seen as someone who has empathy for the people that you are working for. On the scholarly paper from Gadekin and Banit, titled Long-Term Relationship Between Consumers and Social Responsible Companies, the Effect of Consumer Support for the CSR, they explains that the success of a company depends on its ability to create meaningful and unique value to one of the most important stakeholder groups, its consumers. You see that, for example, in the case of Tom Knox, the poultry guy, he went into the village where he saw a necessity. These people, they needed his help with the chickens, and they perceived him as someone who wanted to help them, genuinely help them. The fourth point is listen in order to help. In the reading The New Era of Public Engagement, Marshall Manson, the director of digital strategy at Edelman, says that listening is fundamental to produce a public engagement. One of the biggest problems with the Americans and in Sarkhan and in Asia in general were the fact that they were not able to speak anything else but English, and therefore they couldn't have a direct communication with the people that lived there. There's some passage in the book where one of the congressmen actually go to Sarkhan, and he's not able to communicate with the common people without an interpreter, and that really cuts the communication. And if you are not able to communicate with the people you are working for, then you're not able to really understand what are their needs, and therefore you can't work to help them with those needs. Five, it's the 5 point is make them participants, not just observants. In the reading A New Era of Public Engagement, when Pamela Fieldhouse explains how to achieve public engagement, she says that programs give to the employers. Programs needs to give to the employers a sense of pride and purpose, and if these programs give them that sense of involvement and pride, then they will be more engaged in those programs. Is an example of Homer Atkins, who actually get the whole community involved when he's working in his project for the machine for pumping water. He employs this character called Jipo, who's actually someone from the village. All his sales team that went to other villages to sell the machine were actually people from the community as well. So that makes this machine not this Homer Atkins project, but it was a project for the that it was owned by the whole community. They felt that they were owners or co-owners of this idea. The same thing with Father Finian. he didn't act as the chief executive of the newspaper. He was one contributor of the newspaper, just like the rest of them. So, in conclusion, in the book, all the characters that were presented in the book, they were the face of the United States, and their good and bad actions were influenced how the Asians perceive the American as a whole. In the same way, the way that a PR practitioner conducts themselves, it affects how the audiences perceive the company that they work for. Thank you.